It was the most famous trial in America. Here in Dayton, Tennessee, John Scopes was on trial for teaching evolution to his high school class. And in Tennessee in 1925, that was against the law. People today often picture it as a conflict between science and faith. But in many ways, it was a disagreement between two groups of Christians.
It was a complex affair, and of course, religion itself was on many sides of the debate. As we've already said, the ACLU had originally been formed mostly by Quakers, sort of liberal Quakers in New York City. But when they lined up their expert witnesses to testify, the only scientists that need apply were devout Christian who were scientists. So they had a team of crack experts who would be going to defend evolution and criticize limits on evolutionary teaching, who had perfect credentials as Christians in the sense that they taught Sunday school, they were active members of their church. At this time, it'd be tough to say what were the biggest forces of Christianity in America. You had a large block, a very influential block of mainline Christian churches. The Episcopalian churches were very strong, the Congregational churches were very strong, the Presbyterian churches were very strong. They had already been fighting this evolution creation battle within their churches. It had been going on for 30 years. And the sides were pretty evenly drawn. The most famous scientist at the time in America was a Nobel Prize winner named Millikan, Robert Millikan. And Millikan was very visible on the science and religion issue. He would be like Eddington was in England at the time, very much on the public arguing how science and religion are compatible, very compatible, and indeed science supports our religious view. Well, every one of these people, Hoover, Coolidge, Millikan, could speak for others. Devout Christians, impeccable Christians, strong believers in evolution. Very strong. Now, it might be an evolution that God was involved in, but they would believe in the theory of human evolution. And so when Scopes' defense, as properly organized, was put together, I mean, we're talking about people who had perfect Christian credentials. It wasn't a fight of science versus religion. It was a sense of religion, or at least one strong element of American religion, versus this growing group of fundamentalists. And Bryan included himself in that group. And those groups were the ones who pushed for anti-evolution laws, who argued that evolution, at least applied to humans, isn't compatible with the biblical account of Adam and Eve, and then tying Adam and Eve to Christ calling himself the second Adam, and the importance of the fall. So it's not that they worried about the days of creation and the earth was 10,000 years. That was not an issue for William Jennings Bryan, and he said so at Dayton repeatedly. Those weren't an issue for him. What was an issue is that God separately created Adam and Eve, and that then Adam fell, and that Christ was the second Adam. Those were the issues he was concerned about. Now, the Coolidges, the Hoovers, the Millikans of the world worked in accommodation that they thought was purely Christian, and they would view themselves as Christian. You had this reactional group within the churches that held to the fundamentals of the faith, and the fundamentals of the faith, again, weren't a literal reading of the first chapters of Genesis then. That would come later, but certainly not at the time of the Scopes trial. But rather it was this account of Adam and Eve and the fall. Those were part of the fundamentals of the faith. And so it was a division within Christianity. But what it turned out to be, if you really looked at it, what you saw on the ground in Dayton was a split among Protestants, with sort of liberal and mainline Protestants backing the idea of teaching evolution, while you had the more fundamentalist and the charismatics were beginning to grow in America, and some charismatics were lining up with William Jennings Bryan to try to say, no, we shouldn't teach human evolution. So that's how the battle actually played out. Of course, that's not the way it's portrayed, because that's way too complicated for the media. The media just like the story of science versus religion.
The Scopes trial wasn't a simple conflict between science and faith. Many of the people on both sides were Christian believers. It was a conflict between two groups of Christians. At the end of the trial, Scopes was found guilty, and he was fined $100, but someone else paid his fine for him. It was a victory for prosecutor William Jennings Bryan, but within a few days Bryan was dead. The legend was born that the trial was a great triumph for science in the unending conflict between science and faith. Next time, we'll look at how that legend grew.